Thank you, UXR Collective. Thank you, all of you, for being here. And shout out to my wife and baby girl who are sitting up in the mezzanine. If y'all don't like me, they still will. I hope. You know, it could be a long flight home. Before I get into this, every time anybody gives me a mic, I make a point of saying this. I'm 8 years sober. If you think that drugs and alcohol might be inhibiting with your desire to be the person you're supposed to be, holler at me. I'm at Twitter. At Chris Geison is my handle. It can feel like a very lonely place. You are not alone. And if you're sober and you're here, you're not alone. So let's get into this, reclaiming the promise of UX research. I am a principal UX researcher at a company called AnswerLab. I focus on emerging technologies. Even if you don't work on emerging technologies, my hope is that there will be something here that provides some value. So my message is this. This is our time. The increasing complexity of emerging technologies, the contextual data that we need to take into account, and the ethical lapses by the tech companies who are bringing those new technologies to market provide us with an opportunity to make the case for what UX research is supposed to be about. We are supposed to be getting deeper insights into users. We are supposed to be uncovering those things about people that matter to them so that technology can work for them. We're the ones who talk to users. We're the ones who bring their voices into the conversations about how things will be designed. Our job is literally to speak truth to power. But in order to do that, we're going to need to take off the blinders and step up. So here's what I'm going to talk about today. What's so unique about right now, what's so unique about us, and how the hell are we supposed to do this? We got into this, most of us, because we believe in the promise of technology to help us dream and achieve those dreams. We care about technology, and we care about people. We want to create a better future. But along the way, in the last few years, the companies that are helping to bring that new future to light have not shown themselves to be necessarily the best stewards of that future. In fact, it's fair to say they're fucking it up. That's where we come in. So why us? As UX researchers, it is in our role and our responsibilities. It is in our skill set, and it is a part of our mandate. Again, we're the ones who are talking to users. We are supposed to bring their concerns into the meetings. We're the ones who are supposed to raise their voices up because they're not there to speak for themselves. Again, our job is to speak truth to power, quite literally. Now, a lot of UX researchers that I talk to say to me, well, you know, my company doesn't necessarily want me to get engaged in ethical concerns, or you know, they don't have the budget for me to do contextual inquiry. That wasn't a part of the research brief. The growing trend that I'm seeing as UX research is growing, and it's growing impressively, but there's this growing trend that sees UX researchers as being there to do usability testing, or to validate hypotheses, or to do qualitative A/B testing. We provide a service, but our service is not servitude. We need to reclaim our discipline, and I'm going to touch on how. In the time allotted, there's a lot to cover, so I'm just going to touch on each of these. First, some of these emerging technologies and the challenges and opportunities that exist there. Second, the changes that we need to make to our methodological approaches in order to address the new complexity of these systems and some of the ethical concerns that we need to talk about. And then finally, effecting change in our organizations. if this trend that I'm seeing is true, and we're seen more as kind of just test and iterate, then we're going to need to change some minds. So first, I want to take a look at these technologies, just a couple of them. And we'll start with artificial intelligence. And Carol Smith did a beautiful job this morning of talking about the challenges and opportunities for AI as UX researchers. I will say this, if you are not at a company, and apparently roughly 40% of all companies currently use some form of machine learning in the products that they're bringing to market. If you're not currently working with a product that is driven by or informed by machine learning, I suspect you soon will be. And so the challenge here, distilled, is how do we create experiences that learn? How do we research and create experiences that change and adapt over time, that take into account our context? It's not a straightforward thing. And on a deeper level, how do we ensure that the products that we're bringing to market don't replicate the problems that we see in the real world? Yes, artificial intelligence is inherently biased, but we certainly don't want it to be bigoted. Conversational interfaces, be they voice or text-mediated, have been blowing up. Gartner estimates that within the next couple of years, 85% of all customer service interactions will not involve a human agent. So how do we research and design experiences that are like our most natural mode of communication, the way that we interact with one another, and are unlike the way that we communicate with one another because we're not talking to a human? In one of my research sessions, a woman turned to me at one point and she said, "I don't know if it's because I'm black or because I'm Southern, but these things never understand me." And that was like a punch in the gut. Here we are running around creating the future, and there are people who feel left out of that future simply by virtue of who they are. So when we're creating conversational interfaces, are we going to reflect the diversity of people's speaking styles and writing styles, or are we going to leave some people in the dust? Further, if digital agents are more likely to be trusted than human agents, and there is some research that suggests they are, how do we ensure that they're actually trustworthy? Connected products like wearables, smart homes, smart cities are AI-driven experiences. They bring all of the challenges and opportunities of AI, but they are situated in our personal and public realms. These are experiences that need to take into account the context in which they operate. And there my baby girl is upset. So the question then is, with all of this data that they're collecting, how do we ensure that these technologies that we're creating are personalized without being surveillance? And finally, AR, VR, spatial computing, as it's often called, how do we approach a digital realm that is built in 3D? How do we approach an overlay of contextual information that's provided digitally? How do we approach designing new worlds? What does the IA look like for that? Is it simply going to be physical architecture replicated in a digital realm? Or is there a better way to do things? And on a deeper level, speaking about are we going to replicate what goes on in the real world, how are we going to protect these new worlds that we're creating from the kind of things that we are already seeing in our world? The cruelty, the bullying, especially given that they're frequently providing a measure of anonymity that people don't have in this world. How do we make sure that the new worlds we're creating are safe? The methodologies that we use for this, there is a temptation with new technologies to think, oh, we need new methodologies, there are new things to do. I would suggest that we don't necessarily need new methodologies. But there are some themes that may have come up as we reviewed those technologies. And again, even if you're not dealing with emerging technologies, you may soon find yourself dealing with those technologies, or you may find something in this that is applicable to your own work. Frankly, I think the time for us to reclaim the promise of UX research was with the rise of mobile, because context became so much more important then. We were no longer going to technology in order to use it. We were bringing it with us. But these new technologies and the way that they liberate us from relying on a static screen, the way they join us in our lived experience, is new and unique. Captain Pike of Star Trek Discovery is right. Context is for kings and queens. Somehow it's the future and they're still sexist. The point is that context rules. These new technologies, the way that they move us away from screen-based interactions, Bill Buxton, a Microsoft researcher from the old school, has been talking lately about the fact when the term ubiquitous computing came out, he thinks what would have been a better term that better kind of conveyed what they were trying to communicate was ubiquitous computing. Ubiquity meaning place. That it wasn't that this is computing that is everywhere, it was that this is computing that is situated. So context becomes that much more important for all of the different emerging technologies and for all of the digital experiences that are moving us away from just staring at our phones or laptops. Again, this doesn't necessarily require new methodologies. We've been doing this. Ethnographies and contextual inquiries are methodologies that we took from cultural anthropology that were designed explicitly to understand people in their contexts without judgment. And by context, I'm talking about not just physical context, but cultural, social, linguistic, and temporal. Diary studies, especially video diary studies, are a favorite method of mine for collecting that information from a larger group of participants in a low-cost way, but that allows us to, again, get that physical context, social context, and temporal context so we can understand how experiences change over time, which, again, the more experiences that are driven by machine learning, the more important that change over time becomes. Co-creation workshops and participatory design are other methodologies that we've been using. They're not new. Wizard of Oz testing is something that some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not be. It also is not new. It used to be called Mechanical Turk. The idea of it is that a person in another room is controlling an interface so that it appears that there is actually a system behind it and not the man behind the curtain pulling the levers. A simple example of this would be doing usability research for a voice user interface. You can have the researcher and the participant in one room essentially just doing an interview, exploring a prototype, except that that prototype is being controlled by a designer who's in another room. Again, not new. New to some of us, but not a new methodology. Even our traditional individual interviews can have tremendous value in unearthing contextual insights if they're done earlier in the design process. So none of these are new methodologies. What is new is the urgency with which we need to advocate for them. We are not A/B testers. We are not hypothesis validators. We are user researchers. Our job is to understand those people and their full contexts of life. You don't need to be Charlie Day to connect the dots between user research and ethics. Though this is an area of obvious interest for many of us as it's come up again and again, it's not an area that we traditionally have spent much time in. But there are methodologies for us to get engaged in the ethics of the products that we are informing. Again, we're bringing the concerns of users to the table. Ethics is an appropriate part of that. Now, Carol this morning mentioned both Dan Brown's abusability testing, which I've also heard referred to as black hat brainstorming. How could this technology be misused? She also mentioned Black Mirror brainstorming, and there are also other futurist techniques that can be used to identify what are the possible unintended implications of this. What could go wrong if this technology is more successful than anticipated? But we're going to have to walk before we run. The fact is, our stakeholders aren't necessarily going to allow us to run ethics workshops right out of the gate. It can be as simple as just including a couple of questions in our moderator's guide for individual interviews. I have slipped questions into moderator's guide asking, do you think the people who designed this technology thought about the needs of people like you? Do you have any concerns about this technology? How do you think this could be misused? What could go wrong? Adding those questions into our moderator's guides and surfacing those in the findings we share and advocating for those being taken seriously is absolutely a part of our mandate. So that's great, but we're not necessarily going to walk into the office on Monday and just, things are about to change around here. The fact is, it's going to take some work. So I want to talk a little bit about affecting change. This is a very simple four-step approach to affecting change in our organizations so that our stakeholders see us as having an important role in informing product strategy and the ethics of the technology that we inform, and not just doing usability testing at the end. First, generate small wins. This can be a very small thing. It doesn't need to be a big deal, but we need to demonstrate our value. An example of this, I actually was just talking about inserting these little ethics questions into our moderators' guides. Inserting one of those questions, surfacing the findings that come out as the result of it, and having those findings open people's eyes as to the implications of the technology and the decisions they're making can be a small win. I actually worked on, as a part of a volunteer team for an app that is designed to help PTSD sufferers to deal with their PTSD. And the organization that was bringing us in to do this work, they basically wanted us to do usability testing, which they frequently confused with QA testing because they just had no basis in understanding what we do. When we talked about user research informing earlier stages of the design process, they were skeptical. And so small wins are sometimes going to have to require that we sacrifice a certain measure of rigor in order to demonstrate some value. So in this case, we ran a diary study. They didn't actually agree to doing the diary study. We just did the diary study. We only used 6 participants. It was only a week long. The participants were not found through traditional recruiting methods. I just reached out to friends of friends in order to get 6 people who were willing to fill out a diary in exchange for a $20 gift card because they thought this was important enough that they wanted to contribute to it. Total cost $120 and some time. I managed the whole thing with email and Dropbox. We didn't have big tools. But this kind of guerrilla research allowed us to surface enough insights and to share with our clients video clips that they found compelling enough that they realized that we had something to offer. Small wins are how we convert skeptics. Skeptics are not bad people. They are not against us. They just haven't seen the value that we can deliver. And so we need to demonstrate value and show them what we're able to do. We're not going to change anyone's mind and make them care about something that they don't care about, but we can show them how the insights that we're uncovering around our users' contexts and around the ethical implications of what we're building, we can show how that is a part of what they already care about. But we need to kind of do UX research on our stakeholders. We need to understand what motivates them, what do they care about, and then provide insights that help them to do their jobs. Along the way, we will also find allies and evangelists, and we need to nurture those relationships. We need to ask them what they need, and we need to provide it. They will do our work for us by going out and spreading the word about what we're able to provide. And from there, we can expand our scope. Each small win, each converted skeptic, each ally and evangelist increases our influence and starts a virtuous cycle by which we can demonstrate our value at higher and higher levels, and so that we can actually get that seat at the table. This has worked for me. It has worked for people that I know. We're not going to kick in the door and change our companies, but we can demonstrate our value in small ways over time and actually make substantive changes so that we're a part of the decision-making early on. Again, we're here because we care about technology and we care about people. And we believe that it is supposed to support humanity's ability to dream and our ability to achieve those dreams. But doing that is going to take some work. We're not going to win every battle. We might not even win most of them. But we need to be willing to step up. We need to be willing to seize this opportunity. Again, the increasing complexity of the technologies that we're creating, the way that they are situated in contexts of intersecting cultural, social, linguistic, temporal, and physical realities, gives us an opportunity. The ethical lapses by the companies who are bringing this new technology to bear gives us an opportunity. It is time for us to step up. It is time for us to stop testing and iterating. And let me be clear, I am not denigrating usability testing, because all technology needs to be usable and it needs to be accessible. And I'm not necessarily saying test and iterate is bad, but test and iterate alone is just optimizing the present. It's not questioning the underlying decisions that have gone into the products that we're putting out into the world. It's time for us to understand the full context of our users and their lives. It is time for us to be a source of constructive friction. It is time for us to speak truth to power. It is time for us to disrupt the disruptors. It's time for us to reclaim the promise of what UX research is supposed to be. And I hope you'll join me. Thank you.